Hello and welcome to another episode of Ahead of the Curve. Welcome everybody to the show today. Got a special guest on, Finn Ross from Fray Studio. Hey Finn, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. So Finn, would you mind just giving us a little bit of background of your studio and the work that you do currently?
Well, we call ourselves video designers, but our kind of primary area of work is in like anything that involves a shared experience, live music, theatre, orchestras, installation, corporate clients, and we sort of use video as a storytelling tool to kind of communicate people's message, be it that of a show, that of a corporate client, whatever. And we've been around for about 5 years officially, and sort of many more unofficially, I think. And our studio sort of built out quite a long collaboration between myself and my business partner Adam Young, and many other associates who sort of keep hanging around us. And I think that's us in a nutshell.
So how did you actually start? Like, how did you get into the theater scene, and how did you start exploring the world, the glamorous world of video?
The glamorous world of show business. I'm misadventure, and how did I start? I guess I was drawn to theatre at school because we had a good drama department there. Our school was like a local community hub because I grew up quite rurally, so everything was sort of centralised into sort of one thing. So we were lucky to have a very big theatre in there and an excellent drama teacher, Miss Wheeler, and also the kind of where the theatre was very convenient for sort of hiding from other classes in the building. So it was quite a good place for sort of bunking off from less interesting lessons. So I think that kind of drove me into there. And then, I was very interested in photography as a kid as well. So, I didn't know what video design was then, because that didn't really exist in my mind. And I think it didn't really, well, certainly didn't exist for me as a word until after I graduated. The two things ran on parallel, and then I kind of ran away to London, went to drama school. I have a degree in alternative theatre, which is sort of nonsense, but it's all good fun. I think what it did is it made me very independent and sort of led to a sort of sense of exploration and adventure and trying new things. And in the course of doing that, I worked with a woman called Isabella Rocamora, who was a sort of Spanish anti-gravity artist. She sort of hang off the side of buildings and dance, and her work was about a dialogue with architecture, and she and changing people's perceptions of the places they find themselves in. And she would project onto buildings, which is the first time I sort of played with it. So that was like the gateway drug. And then, media servers was sort of starting to appear. High End had just sort of produced, the Catalyst version, something very low. Yeah. And, I managed to blag one of those for my final year project and did some very pretentious installation. And then, I kind of left university. I had to work. So I did sort of lighting programming, that kind of thing. And that was just the time when media servers were starting to be controlled by a DMX. So there was a sort of natural kind of joining there, I think. And that's when I kind of really went over to the dark side into video, and kind of working for other designers, programming, cobbling systems together out of whatever we could find lying around. I found this picture the other day. It was
in true theater fashion.
Oh, in true theater fashion. Like I found this picture of this system we'd put together for Measure for Measure. And we'd clearly gone through like every cable bin in the National Theatre and picked out everything we could find, and sort of like, kind of shoehorned vision mixers into catalysts, into kind of, like 10K projectors when they were sort of the size of a small car and all that kind of stuff. And there's another picture I found, like trying to rig this thing, and just sort of me looking like quite nervous, like, should this actually fly? Because, it was the size of all the moving lights in the rig put together.
Is my Frankenstein going to work?
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of, that, and it was kind of fun then, because it was all much more informal and much more about sort of blagging it together, and sort of, as much as I do love, now we're in a very fully 3D workflow. Back then it was more like, can I get video onto this? Right, yes, great, make some content for it. Okay, like let's turn it into some cues. And we were a lot less organized than we are now.
We're very organized on the keyboard at the right time and hope it works, hope it goes.
yeah, like operated entire shows in foreign languages we didn't speak, but you sort of just went with feeling and all that kind of stuff. And I think that was the sort of beginnings of path into design. I worked with people like Sven Ottell and Dick Straker when I was younger as their associate, and they're still good friends now. And it just sort of came time to go off and make my own work and have my own misadventures. And that's sort of where it all began, sort of in earnest. I think I designed my first proper show maybe 2008 or something like that. And then sort of gradually, here we are 12 years later. So
what the journey it has been.
Oh, so much fun. Yes.
So in your kind of progress into video and becoming a video designer, was that kind of the passion that you had at first, or were you actually on some sort of were you on a different course, if you will? Like me, I studied in audio, and I never even imagined in a million years I was going to end up, moving into lighting, and then set design, and then video and real-time video and that kind of thing. So, just kind of landed here.
It's something about our industry, isn't it? Though you almost have to become jack of all trades when you're starting out in order to kind of pay rent, if you know what I mean. But then you do kind of shift around. Like I remember when I was talking to my parents as I was sort of like younger, they were like, "You're focusing on a different thing every single week. Like when are you going to settle down?" I was like, "Well, I think at that point as well, the world was sort of changing quite a lot. Like everything, it felt like video had been used in live performance for a very long time. Like, I mean, let's not pretend the Capitalist Media Server kind of back in 2002, 2003, whatever, invented a whole new medium. It has existed and been used for a bazillion times. Capitalist finally, and others like it at the time, finally made it malleable and easy to use, rather than like I can remember laying data off onto Doremi hard drive players in real time, from a kind of camcorder in my hand, and segmenting and recording things via timecode, and it's horrible. So there was a while I was very interested in the technology, and I still am, because there's like a kind of plurality to what we do. Like you have to have the creative and you have to have the technology, and one cannot exist without the other.
I like to compare it to driving a car, or being a car mechanic, an auto mechanic, or designing a car. You have to know how the car works and the technical aspects of the car before you can actually drive the damn thing, not before you could drive it, because we can learn how to drive a car, but if you understand how the mechanics and how it works, then being able to you have the knowledge to be able to start designing that kind of thing.
Definitely. I think it's very important to know the tools you're playing with, because like a screen, like I'm sort of talking to you through now, how things look on it are 100 times different to how they look when they are out there in the three-dimensional world in reality, when they've gone through a load of processing. They're on the stage, they're on textured surfaces, or it's coming, you're dealing with a mixture of LED and all these things, create challenges. And you have to really, I think I wouldn't say I could sort of, do a large, vast, complex show single-handedly by myself now, because systems have got to such a kind of scale and a size where you need a sort of group of people to make things work. But like last year, I did a small show called The End of Eddie, which was like 4 televisions and 2 actors and a sort of performance amongst them all. And that really was just me and a camera filming a lot, and then QLab and hundreds of cues in QLab. It can work, and it was really good fun sort of doing something completely hands-on. But I think over time the technology was interesting, and I could see where it was going somewhere, but I think I was definitely more interested in sort of making ideas happen and in that kind of side of the room, and maybe just putting yourself out there a bit more, because the sort of technology has a very certain path to it. Well, I suppose you're actually trying to make the technology, but when you're a sort of end user like we are, so there was something I think more about the kind of creative process which was less certain, because often you turn up in a theatre to make a show with a I call it like a dressing up box. So you've prepared, you've made content for scenes, and you've sort of worked out things to time code and all that kind of stuff, but it will all completely change the minute you kind of put a room full of people's opinions onto it and start seeing it in space and learn how it all interacts with one another. So that kind of mystery I found quite interesting, and the sort of the kind of the risk of it, I think. So that's sort of, I think, but when I look back, I think I still take pictures. I take them less often, I think, because a camera has kind of become a tool. It's not just a sort of object of fun. if you know what I mean. But kind of pitches and theatre, it sort of feels like the way to join things together. It's a bit like when we first met, you were using some very good triangle analogies.
Yes.
I think we kind of as theatre designers, we need to kind of hit 3 points of a triangle, and you're maybe not so, which I think is understanding theatre, understanding creativity, and then understanding the technology. And, everyone sort of circles around those in different ways. But yeah, that's, actually, sort of truly answer your question, I went down to London thinking I'd be a director, but that ended very quickly because I was like, no, not for me. Like I can make ideas work, but maybe not with kind of flesh and blood human beings like actors.
I think that becomes more of an exploration of ourselves as well, our capabilities, our passions, what we are truly passionate about, because we can always perceive things in a certain way. Or pick things up in a certain way and then quickly realize, yeah, that's not exactly what I really want to do. Like asking yourself, what do I really want to do? Tracy said misadventure or love misadventures. Yes, absolutely loving misadventures all over the place.
Yeah.
Priscilla, I just wanted to say hi to Priscilla as well. She's a good dear friend of mine from Las Vegas. So yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to dig in a little bit as well, just kind of explore and touch upon some of the things that are happening today, especially, coming into theater and seeing a lot of shows that are also now being converted to the screen, that are being broadcast on, Amazon Prime or Netflix or that sort of thing, and kind of get some of, maybe a little bit of a behind the scenes viewpoint from yourself. And some ideas of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of phenomenon, isn't it? It's sort of something that has, I feel it's sort of really gathered pace, certainly in the UK with things like NT Live. I think as a way primarily to address the fact that they are a national theatre for Britain, but they can't take every show outside of the building. So it's an interesting, there's so much in it because opera's been doing it for a while, I think, as a way of kind of getting out there, like Met Live, Royal Opera House Live, and we've always had operas on the radio and that sort of stuff. So, and having grown up very remotely I grew up on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. Like live music often came down the radio, and sort of now my parents see a lot of the work I do by going to the same theatre I was talking about earlier, and they project it there because that's one of the kind of event theatre kind of cinemas, event cinema places, and like when you're on the side of thing, it's very strange when suddenly a bunch of cameras turn up inside your theatre, because it's sort of like, well, this isn't a film. So how do you kind of, how do you take the liveness?
How do you
get the stage?
Because theater is definitely a living organism, right? When you're an audience, and it's just like going to a concert. When you're an audience in the crowd, the performers feed off of the vibe that is being portrayed back into the audience as a spectator. And being able to gauge those emotional reactions.
It's a big thing because, like even I've been like giving lectures and things via Zoom recently, and it's very strange when you can't hear what the room people are saying, like whether your terrible joke actually got a laugh or not. You sort of hope it does and keep going. And at least for the performers, when they are making those things, there is an audience in the room, so they have the energy of the space. Because one amazing thing about live versus a film is risk. Things could go wrong, things could happen. The performer might say the wrong line, they might bump into that chair. There's putting yourself in the hands of that performer, be it a music artist or an actor or an opera singer or a ballet dancer, and investing in them. And I think what makes it work is the fact that it's 90% of the time it is live. You're watching something that is genuinely happening somewhere else, albeit across the world or in another city. They do get played out again on replays, as is happening a lot now. But I think they address like issues of accessibility fantastically. Like someone told me a fun fact that the Royal Shakespeare Company in the UK has more people will see one live broadcast of their show than will walk through the doors of any of their theatres in an entire year, which is it's sort of a mind-boggling thing when you think about it, that your sort of reach of it is absolutely enormous, because we can only play to, an average size theatre in the UK, 1,000 people a night, maybe an average size theatre in America, sort of 2,500 to 3,000 sort of thing. So, our audience and our reach is limited. So what's wonderful is this has it opens us out to a much wider audience and allows people to access things they wouldn't normally be able to access. I will admit, I do find there's a strangeness about it as well, because it's sort of, as much as it's live, you're not there. And there's just, like, I think a lot of conversations, I'm sure you've been having, we're all having, is how to create a sense of liveness when remote. And that is a very difficult thing to achieve, because the shared experience of being in a room with a group of other people is almost impossible to replicate. But I think what can be replicated is the kind of the uniqueness of the event, and the fact that it's only then and there, and within reason, the liveness, as in being in the hands of the performer, their interaction with possibly a virtual audience or with other performers. Obviously socially distanced performance is sort of that hasn't really been worked out yet. If you think of a 90-piece orchestra, keeping them 2 meters apart, you need an aircraft carrier. So I think we're not quite there in the kind of COVID universe. But I think certainly now there's been I've really enjoyed a lot of live things that I think wouldn't have normally reached such a wide audience, being put out from smaller theatres as well, that have maybe filmed things on much more humble terms than something like NT Live, which is a vast production that's sort of put together over many, many days and many, many test recordings with some incredibly talented people. That is bringing smaller and more interesting things to the front. Or Forced Entertainments just did a show entirely in Zoom, which was kind of amazing and very strange.
That is really interesting. It would have been interesting to see how that whole thing would have played out. And we're starting to see all kinds of different science experiments in ways that things were done conventionally, and bringing them over into a digital world.
Yeah, and I feel like the tidal wave is very much, it's not here yet, but I think it's sort of coming, because I think people have been looking for a way to do this for a long time, for accessibility, expanding audiences, et cetera, et cetera. But live will always be live. I think I think that can't be taken away. But while it can't be live, I think there's still something people need from it. I feel like theatre is it's a place for kind of reflection and contemplation about kind of where we stand, kind of as people, as a society, as a world. And I think there's a big need for that right now. And it's sort of nice to see that's able to be addressed in a remote way. I've certainly found it comforting and found it enjoyable that those kind of centers of your brain can still be triggered in a way that kind of watching something like Netflix just can't, because there's sort of, I think the deal you have as an audience member with it is different, and you can think about live as you can't go and get another beer from the fridge or make a cup of tea or whatever. It's there, and I have watched some shows.
You could, but you might miss a really important part.
Yes, exactly. It was like I've watched like operas that are 5 hours long with no interval, and you're freely encouraged to go in and out. But that's like a Philip Glass thing where everything happens every 20 minutes, so you're kind of fine on that one. It's. I wish I could say like there's like a silver bullet that can sort of solve everything and give our, kind of just make the theatre appear in your house, but there isn't, because theatres will always exist, and I think live music will always exist, but how they can reach us in our homes while we can't be there is it's a fun puzzle to open up, isn't it? Is that a question?
Susie just posted, I think, a question for the group about theater. I'm just trying to read it really quickly.
Oh, interesting question. I think
and it's
very French, I love it. I think it would definitely draw people in, because I think you'd get sort of maybe 70% of the experience at home, but or in a cinema, but I think you really need to be there for 100% of the experience. So I think it could be a very nice way to kind of bring people in to our world, because I think people can find theatre intimidating and baffling, which has been another thing that's been very productive about a lot of things like Met Live, Royal Opera House Live, NT Live, and various other things, is it has sort of brought theatre, as democratized it, and brought a theatre show out to people at a very reasonable cost, kind of very close to their homes. Like Disney Plus is streaming Hamilton soon, and which is a kind of lovely gesture.
Extremely excited about that.
Yes, no, I'm very excited too, so I won't have to sort of kill someone and sacrifice a goat to get a ticket. Because even if you know someone, it's still impossible. But also Disney are the Aladdin is available or will be available soon on Disney Plus as well, the live version of Aladdin. So you'll sort of be able to watch Aladdin the animated movie, Aladdin the feature movie, and then Aladdin the musical sort of thing, which is sort of you're gonna have a whole day of Aladdin if you want. Which would be slightly terrifying, but probably quite good fun. So it's interesting sort of things like going into the netverse and into the streaming things. And, certainly we've had requests for various things that I have done that have been filmed to be used in cinemas when they're able to be reopened, on a regular showing, as opposed to, as a one-off, because the studio release schedules are quite empty because they haven't been filming things. And they also, while things are slow, are not going to release any big titles. So, there a lot of programmers seem to be looking to event cinema as a way to sort of address that need. Yeah,
no, absolutely. As Tracy's just mentioning, hoping there's a solution for keeping live events and adding virtual, for example, the Atlanta Orchestra at Piedmont Park. That was a good point, Tracy. That was something I was actually going to bring up during the conversation, was to talk about the idea of maybe a hybrid theater scene where part of it could be virtualized and part of it might be live, or looking at things from a scalability perspective. What are your thoughts on traditionally looking at Broadway and some of the other houses where you were talking about, theaters that could seat or capacities of 2,300 people? Do you think that's still going to be viable? And do you see maybe smaller, maybe more intimate theater that is happening, or even things like Tupac that he's been experimenting, with this kind of performance VR ideology and creating those kinds of environments?
Yeah, I think when this is all over and done, when Corona is finished and this is a sort of distant memory, which, I think we all really hope it will be, and, it will be at some point, 2,500 seat, 3,000 seat theatres will be full again, because it's a great thing to go and do. But I think there is going to be a long journey back to that. Certainly in the UK, the current feeling is we won't be really putting anything on stage till next spring, because we won't be able to have a rehearsal room till after Christmas, and then you'll have to blah 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 go through rehearsal tech, putting the show up. So it'll be sort of March, April next year by the time we actually get anything new open. Obviously things reopening will be a little bit sooner, but I'm
going to put Chet on the spot here too, because I know he's viewing, and I'd love to see what Chet's opinions are on this as well, seeing as he does a lot of work as well behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So Chet, calling you out, buddy.
Yeah. But it'd be interesting to see where the kind of more AR based world can go and where that can take us, sort of thing. Particularly when kind of viewing things via a screen, because that format works sort of so well as a sort of another layer on the person. Because one thing we're always asked in theatre is you want to make an image appear in thin air, which you can't do in a truly live setting. But in a hybrid setting, you can have the individual and you can have something really magically appearing in thin air, and the viewer can perceive the whole thing. So I think there's kind of a lot of layers to kind of open up in there and start playing with. I think the problem is getting enough people around a table at the moment to start exploring that, because we're also remote still. But I'm definitely involved in a couple of things that I can't really speak about at the moment that are looking to kind of answer these questions. And I don't have an amazing answer, but I think things like the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra are really good examples of how sort of live is changing and sort of moving into these hybrid worlds, which I find exciting.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think the possibilities coming in, you touched on something interesting on the AR and playing out AR within a theater environment. And experimenting with the different types of technologies in theater, because we're starting to see a little bit more of that coming into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's interesting, like, I suppose there's two levels. Like, as a person there in the room, this sort of AR experience is a challenging one because you'll have to put something over your face in order to kind of experience it, which is I have always found, even if it's putting on 3D glasses and a panto for like the genie to fly around your head or something like that, it's a really difficult thing to kind of make an audience sort of break from the show without saying, put on your 3D glasses now, which, in a kind of pantomime or a sort of, slightly less sophisticated form of entertainment is a very easy thing to do, but finding a way to persuade someone in something that's trying to be a bit more slick, I think that's a really hard thing to do, short of like a little icon flashing up saying, now's the 3D, or like the John Waters thing, like scratch the sniffogram or whatever it was.
The scratch and sniffogram.
Yes, the scratch and sniff. So, but I think there's a sort of fun thing that, like, I think it'd be really interesting to see what sort of smaller, more creative companies do rather than sort of more commercial end, because I think putting those tools in the hand of the idea of like a multi-layered show that exists in one way in the theater and one way at home, in one way in the car park outside when you're watching it projected onto the side of a building or something, like put that into the hands of, like Slung Low or the Worcester Group or something like that. And that would be fascinating to sort of see where sort of those collective minds would take that kind of idea and start kind of, go on another kind of brilliant misadventure with it and see where you kind of get to next. Because I think definitely experimenting is the way to kind of go to find the answers to these things.
Yeah, and speaking of that, actually, I think Chet actually replied. He's got a good reply. I think right now that it's a bit of a stopgap where we're going, where we're doing interesting things with the limited technology. The big interest will come in the evolution into the art form, which, I absolutely agree. What does it mean to write for Zoom? Can we perform with a few living rooms? And how do we connect theater? The explorations will continue. And I think streaming of live theater is going to continue, but the art form needs to continue and to embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think
really well put, Chet.
I think the question as well about like, how do you write for Zoom is really interesting, because sort of one thing, because Zoom is effectively a sort of screen-based medium, and in theater, like our kind of rules of narrative are very different from rules of narrative in like a film or something like that. And when you're adapting a film to the stage or a book to the stage, you often have to kind of move things into kind of theater world as opposed to film verse, because what takes 30 seconds in film will take 15 minutes, half an hour on the stage if you were to try and do that. Whereas actually on Zoom, you could have something live, but fundamentally kind of engage with the rules of a much more filmic narrative, which would be kind of quite interesting and fun. Or even something like StreamYard like this, where you can cut from one person to another from multiple locations, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, frankly, on Zoom, you can have a virtual, if you put a green screen behind yourself, or even if you don't, the virtual background is, I think, something that's keeping us all slightly sane and amusing. Like I've done this week from the corridor in The Shining, and last week a lot of Lou roll behind me, but even seeing someone did this quite funny thing where they recorded their camera for Zoom, and for 5 minutes, just completely empty sort of thing. And then they walked in the door and put a cup of tea down on the desk. And then this sort of happened as we were in the meeting with the person. You were like, wait, what?
What just happened there?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just those little kind of interruptions and sort of messing around, I think, are quite interesting, to say the least. Because, like in the most kind of rough way, like Chet points out, the technology isn't there, but you can, I think you could have quite a lot of fun in Zoom quite quickly.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of these different technologies or the conferencing tools and webinar tools are really starting to catch on that, because Microsoft actually announced yesterday that they just implemented NDI into Microsoft Teams, right? And we're starting to see NDI being integrated into all of these different platforms to be able to utilize them in really creative ways. Isabel, actually, who's on right now, who said, I need a green screen designer. Yes, definitely. I'm open for, I've actually got a green screen, just haven't had time to throw it up. Been kind of busy as well, working on the new job and getting myself acquainted with all of my new tasks. But yes, definitely, that's in the plans. But talking about creative tools and creative ways to be able to visualize things, Isabel's been doing some interesting stuff with Notch, as I know that's a very desired and utilized tool of from yourself as well. To be able to create environments and then pipe them in as environments directly into a streaming platform. So what are your thoughts on that kind of idea for live performance?
Well, I think Notch, tools like Notch, Unity, etc., are sort of really changing how we can approach things, because the interesting thing to me about those is not trying to kind of recreate an environment that is real, if that makes sense. Like, if you were to kind of put a musician in there's no point in trying to kind of recreate a stadium, because you're not in a stadium, so why be in a stadium? Like, let's do something kind of more fun and inventive, and
like Fortnite.
Yeah, Fortnite's a great example. Or even Duran have a world in Second Life. Who knew? Like, in sort of researching something other, I came across that slightly terrifying fact. But Fortnite is doing really well and engaging, because Epic are sort of very interesting. So it's Epic, isn't it? Yeah, an interesting sort of bunch. And I think just even something as simple as NDI being pumped into Zoom and a couple of really good ideas. Even if you don't get all the fancy camera tracking, you could at least kind of, I would love to not be seeing myself in my attic all day long, just at the most simple level. But tools like Notch do give us that power. Like, I mean, Katy Perry on was it American Idol the other day is a sort of great example of that kind of thing. Someone had to do that eventually, and she is the perfect kind of artist to do that kind of thing with. But I feel like the problem with that is now she's done it, anyone else who's going to come along and do it afterwards is going to feel very much like a pretender to the throne. Or you just have to throw all that away and stop being in real spaces and go somewhere completely abstract and kind of go much more into the kind of world of sort of, generative art and, kind of code-based, art experiences, and kind of find a way to kind of bring people or synthesize people into those. It would be quite fun and interesting. And I think, when the artists get their hands on it, it will, some fun things will happen, because NDI is a great thing because it opens up so many tools to integrate with other tools, and software being so much more kind of sideways compatible is a lovely thing with sort of software hosting software, integrating with software sort of thing. You sort of definitely kind of takes your need to be a kind of hardcore coder away and allows you to be sort of more sort of creative and work within tools to invent something kind of new for yourself. And now with things like Notch and general engine-based stuff, it's so much more instant, rather than waiting for 4 days for After Effects to preview like 3 seconds of footage and sort of wondering why you've been suffering like this for so long.
And I think we're starting to see a lot of those trends. I mean, we've definitely seen a lot of progress, even over the course of the last few weeks, in those technologies and in those creative spaces. There's a lot of artists that have been experimenting and dabbling in those gaming engines and been creating some very interesting scenes and content and test content. So, there's no doubt in, I think, just about any of our minds that is the general direction that this whole world is moving into now. And, real time is here, and real time is now. I think there's still some development that needs to be done with some of the tools to kind of progress us into more complete photorealism, but every single day we're getting closer and closer and closer.
No, I think so. I mean, just looking at things like the AI ray tracing in Notch that's sort of come about quite recently is sort of leaps and bounds ahead of sort of where we were, a year ago, and that just sort of continues to sort of improve across all these different platforms. And but it's interesting what you say about the sort of photorealism thing, because if you really do want that kind of like redshift like texture, then you do sort of have to go into that world. When we can have that in reality, then we'll be going somewhere kind of quite interesting. And also, the kind of computational power required to drive those things as well, sort of coming down would be sort of nice. So it's sort of the kind of barrier to entry isn't quite so high in terms of cost for people, because it can be really expensive to actually get all that stuff working in a satisfying way. But if you're sort of selling your services, that's okay. But if you're kind of trying to learn, that's a different kind of a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So kind of digging into that a little bit more, what have you been experimenting with? What has your studio been working on behind the scenes? And what have you been bringing yourself up to speed on?
Well, I mean, we've been we've been making very good friends with Notch for the sort of past however long, couple of years now. We first used it in 2017, which is been a really fun journey because I think they're very much behind trying to get into the theatre world. And as a sort of software company who's actually interested in theatre, that feels like a rare thing because we're so used to sort of being ignored or having to kind of steal everyone else's tools and make them our own. So we've enjoyed that and seeing how that's evolved. And because, it's nice being involved in how software develops, like our kind of work with Disguise and Notch, because it sort of becomes something that serves your needs and becomes your tools. So we've definitely been kind of all learning that, using that, and sort of doing things like recently on Back to the Future the Musical, we decided we were not going to use After Effects unless we absolutely had to, because we just sort of decided enough was enough. And sort of after a couple of conversations with Sarah and Matt giving one very rousing speech at a conference we were both at, I was just like, yeah, this has to end. So we decided to kind of abandon After Effects and just go deep end into Notch and see if we could deliver the whole show that way. And so we made about 85% of the show in Notch, and we made it a lot quicker and a lot more intuitively than we would have done in After Effects. So that was one kind of very real world and recent example that was very sort of satisfying, not without its problems. Certainly, trying to use real-time tools requires a lot of real-time recalibration as well, because you kind of make something look pretty and then you're watching the notch marks and then you put it into the media server and the media server just goes, ugh, and lots of little red lights start flashing everywhere and you're like, well, this is supposed to be designed for real time, but there's only so far a computer can go still. So there's that. And then in terms of sort of more new things that we've been using, kind of, I think the downtime we'll find ourselves with now, we've been looking at sort of the other engines out there, because I think we very much feel real time is where it will go. And like, to speak from a theatrical perspective, like theatre is it's very much made in the room, and it's very much about, I put something on stage, a lighting designer puts something on stage, and a piece of set moves into that place, and then someone will come and have running over to you with a great idea, and then that idea will inspire another idea, and then this sort of chain reaction begins, and that sort of chain reaction sustains for the entirety of the session as just ideas are flowing and circling around. And you've got to be able to move really quickly to keep up with those things. And traditional tools like After Effects or Final Cut or whatever aren't fast enough and intuitive enough and quick enough and designed for a live environment to actually sustain that pace. Because there's too many times I've had to sit there and say to a director, yes, I can absolutely do that, but it will be tomorroa by the time it comes back from the render farm. Yeah, and then when it does come back from the render farm that's split between Poland and South Korea and I don't know, Skegness, you kind of find that there's one weird light that's flickering because a box wasn't ticked, and you're just like, oh. So ending that is a really, really nice moment, I think. Moving on to newer things is a good thing. Is that question from Brett?
That's from Brett, yeah. Probably loaded term for you, Finn. But do you have a workflow for capturing moments of enhancement? Or is it about setting up the place for beautiful accidents, or setting up the place for beautiful accidents?
I think it's the latter. It's about kind of creating the right environment. I mean, there are certain things you can definitely do, I think, to kind of create those environments where ideas sort of spark alive. Like, I always try and have the team of people around me on my side of things that I want working with me, because when I say, oh God, this isn't working, what's wrong with it? Someone will just be like, they'll be able to very honestly tell me. Or if I say to a sort of animator colleague, he's like, could you just make that more fabulous? They kind of know what I mean. Or if I say to a programmer, it's like, it just needs to be over there. They can sort of deal with that while you're dealing with a set designer, a director, and a producer who are all having ideas and opinions at once. But also, I think that also kind of comes down to other people in the room as well, and how collaborative they're willing to be. Some people just aren't very collaborative, and no matter how hard you try, you can't get around that. And some people are, an open book, and that's fantastic. So it's sort of, I wish there was a golden rule, but sadly there is not.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think that we're creatures of being, and we need environments to create the scenes and create the moods, as I mentioned before, and create the emotional enticement of the area. Scott mentioned about the days of pre-rendered content are numbered, but we'll need, to solve the problem of canvas sizes.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have an answer, or at least some answers about that somewhat soon. But yeah, that is definitely, I think, a challenge that everybody is, or some people are definitely facing.
Yeah, it's a very, I mean, any LED wall of any size you look at nowadays is going to be somewhere between 2 and 4K, and and way bigger in sort of commercial installations, and certainly in so that's where I was speaking from a sort of theatre resolution perspective, but in outdoor as well, and that's a lot of pixels to push, and that needs a lot of very expensive hardware to actually make happen. And I mean, certainly, like you're sort of alluding to, if you could sort of distribute the processing of that among machines, that would certainly make a very nice thing for us when you're just sort of, or I don't know, I'm sure there are many clever solutions, but I mean, I think Scott has a very good point. And also, I mean, theatre isn't a wealthy establishment, and I think when we come back from after COVID-19, it will be even poorer. So even the media servers that can sort of host real-time engines are at a certain price point, even versus their own other hardware that companies might make that doesn't. So you have to be kind of lucky. I mean, like Tracy's saying,
Tracy was asking an interesting question regarding the budgeting about ticket prices for theater.
It's an interesting question, Tracy, and I think it's going to be the other way around based on a lot of conversations I'm having. I think people will, because the market won't be hot, you won't be seeing $700 Hamilton tickets like we've been seeing for the past couple of years, or a $400 Broadway ticket, because I think people won't pay that. And I think producers will be able to run their shows at a lower profit point, and they would much rather run it and have some profit than no profit, because when a building is open, they're also making money from merchandise, they're making money from bar sales, they're making money from program sales, they're also, just the sheer footfall then creates social media, which then sells more tickets. So I think they would much rather have people in at a lower price point than at sort of the previously seen price points, because demand will be softer. It's just a fact, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how that colors what the kind of theatre landscape on both sides of the Atlantic and internationally looks like.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I wanted to ask you, kind of as we start to wrap things up, out of the projects that you've worked on, what has been your favorite project?
It's such a good question.
That might be a hard one to answer, but
well, I'd say it's split over multiple projects that are favorites for different reasons. I think.
Fair enough.
Going back to kind of mishap and misadventure, I'd say American Psycho, the musical, is one of those things that stands out in my mind, because it's one of those things when it sort of first appears on your desk, you're like, they've made a musical of it? What? But then you listen to it and you're like, oh my God, this is fantastic, because it's like all that brilliant 80s pop music and then someone like Duncan Sheik kind of synthesizing it all. But it was more the experience we had in making it was just fucking, sorry, I shouldn't swear. It was chaos.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It was sheer fucking bedlam. I think it's the best way to put it, because the brief until 2 weeks beforehand was like, there'll just be a little bit of video, and then it was like, we need numbers for 15 songs, and the set is effectively a white space that needs to be painted with video all night long. My budget was £500. I had one programmer and no one else, and you're like, that's not happening. Yeah, it's like, yeah, great. And I got told this as I was at my cousin's wedding. Like, great. Well, I can't do anything about it for 2 days now because I will be drunk for 2 days. But anyway, I very quickly cut my fee in half, paid that to the wonderful Adam Young, who is the AY of Fray. Persuaded the theatre to give me, get my budget up to £2,000. And then we basically sat there with sort of, we just about got the first 3 numbers animated, rendered, and programmed. And then Adam would sort of work 2 numbers ahead, animating, rendering it. I'd be sort of watching it running on stage and noting it, and then Jonathan, my programmer, would be sort of programming the next number in blind while also pressing go. So the thing was, it was sort of really good fun as well, because we were making something
chaos, but it sounds like a blast at the same time.
Exactly, because I think we all loved what we were making, and
a beautiful disaster, so to speak.
Exactly, and I think that was just. It was just a joy, because you were flying by the seat of your pants, working on complete instinct. You hadn't had too much time to overthink things, navel gaze, and kind of lose the kind of. And as a result, I think it had a very kind of raw kind of oomph to it. And I think another one for a different reason is a Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is for the collaboration I had with the fellow designers.
One of my personal favorites, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I mean,
It was mind blowing.
it's so nice to hear that, because I think another reason I think it stands out as a favorite, apart from the incredible time I had making it and connection I have with the creative team for that still to this day, is the kind of legacy it seems to leave with its audience. And that is a really, when I was kind of young, naive, and sort of full of fat, I definitely think I kind of had got on the train down to London to change the world with theatre. And I feel like Curious is maybe the closest.
We're still that way, aren't we?
Yes. I think Curious is the closest I've got to actually achieving that, I think. Like when people with children on the spectrum come up to you and say they finally understand that kid, you're just like, okay, I just need to go and cry in a corner now, because that's powerful, and that's a real kind of test of how we can communicate as an audience to people. Or people who see it have said they finally understand themselves after watching that show. You're like, that's really, really awesome. So I feel very lucky to have been able to be part of something like that still sustains to this day as well, because not all shows have a legacy, and it's amazing that this one has. So yeah, they're the top two.
That one kind of gave a preview of it gave a preview of what a virtual set could actually do, and how you create environments in a way where you're still capturing the audience and bringing them into the environment with you inside the theater scene. And that was one of the things that really floored me as I was sitting in Broadway, in a multi-thousand seat, or no, it wasn't multi-thousand seat. It was fairly large.
Over 1,000.
It was, but
but
I still felt like I was just there. I felt like I was completely connected and going through all the emotions and all of the experiences, throughout that journey. And I walked out of the theater and I went, that was incredible, because it was just an elegant mix of technology, reality, and a virtual environment.
Yeah.
Creating that scene.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about what you say is like the kind of the virtual environment. It's like, because it is the world inside his head, inside the character's head. It's like it's a very psychological space, and I think that's something that'd be interesting to see how we can actually make theatre remotely or virtually kind of more psychological, more inside the person's head. That I think would be quite exciting. So let's hope we can kind of learn from those legacies.
I think you've actually struck a pretty good point, just coming from a live environment, because a lot of it is psychological. And if you can kind of figure out a way to pull the people back in, even if it's through the screen that they're viewing in, then you've won. You've achieved it. So that is definitely, I think, a really good point to bring up. Well, Finn, I think we're coming up to the end of our time. I just really wanted to thank you so much for being a guest on.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely, and lovely to talk to all the different people watching as well.
Yeah, we're going to stay on, of course, for another 10 minutes or so to do some Q&A. But I heavily advise those of you who are watching to go and check out some of Finn's work. We didn't have time to showcase any of it visually today. So www.fraystudio.co.uk, just incredible works. And next week, I have another very interesting speaker coming on the show. His name is Tamuz Dubnov. He created a platform called Zuzor, which is built on interactives. But he comes from a performing background, from dance, and he took his performing background and started to embrace technology around him and create different interactive environments and real-time environments from the perspective of being a performer. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation next week. So please come back and join us there. And of course, stay ahead of the curve. So Finn, we're just going to continue on here and just kind of touch on maybe some of the works that you are doing or that you have worked on in the past. Maybe I can actually throw up a few of the images that we have here, and we can talk about a few of these as well. And those of you who are watching, of course, if you guys have any questions that we haven't been able to haven't answered, or if you have something running around in your mind, please, now is definitely a good time to bring those up. So I am just going to throw my screen up here. I think, there we go. And yeah, I have to move my mouse to the other screen. But should we start with maybe Joanne Pearson was actually one that I found also very interesting, and I know that you spoke about this a little bit at Luma.
Mm.
And this, when I saw this as well, and you had dropped it into the folder for the assets, I found that this actually almost played out to the way that a lot of us are in today. The environment that we are in right now.
Yes, it's so very true. Well, this is a picture from Chimerica, which was a show we did at the Armida in 2013, I think, which is like a kind of white cube on stage that had various panels that sort of slid around, and it was sort of like a meditation on American and Chinese culture and the sort of, I think, misunderstandings between each other, but particularly sort of American misunderstandings of Chinese culture and, about sort of capitalism versus sort of communism, blah, blah, blah. And it was a fun thing because it sort of, this is another favorite show because it's another kind of very psychological space because as much as they're always just photographs kind of mapped onto the cube or whatever, there's always the kind of sprocket of the film strip sort of along the top and the bottom of the set, sort of heightening it, making sure you kind of always know what you're looking at isn't supposed to be real. It's an imposition into the environment because it's an abstraction of what's actually happening, which sort of means you're free to kind of play around with it and make it weird, which in a play can be quite hard because plays often operate on a very a naturalistic plane where they, it's people in a room and they have a relationship with each other. Thank you, Tracy. And video is quite a large and powerful presence in the space, so you can't overwhelm those relationships. You've got to kind of compose your work so you support the performer and sit them in it. So I found this one by abstracting it. We were sort of actually quite easy able to have a big world around people in very naturalistic scenes like this one in a sort of little kitchen in Beijing, as we're all sort of sitting in our rooms now, kind of desperate to get out, as this guy was too. So it was a very special show because it was just 500 photos, very carefully photoshopped, and almost all animation was done by scenic movement more than anything else. So it was a very special show in my heart, and a really nice collaboration again with Ez Devlin, the set designer, and the lighting designer Tim Lutkin and the sound designer Carolyn. It was a beautiful show.
It looks like a piece from the heart for sure, just in the photography and the assets that, well, at least the pieces that I've been able to view, because I haven't been able to see it in person.
No, sadly, yeah, it'd be lovely for it to come back.
Hopefully one of these days I'll be able to go and see it.
Yes, exactly.
Well, yeah, I guess we'll see where that goes. The Tempest.
Well, talking about real-time content and stuff, this was the first time we actually really engaged with real-time, but sort of, I guess, not quite in the way we understand it now, because Tempest is this Prospero, the guy with the stick there, and then there's Ariel, his magical sprite. Ariel has two forms: his normal corporeal form and then his magical form when he goes and creates mischief. And you see him now in his sort of sprite form. So the sort of brief from the Royal Shakespeare Company was, whenever Ariel is this kind of sprightly creature, he should be, moving freely and flying all around the space, but able to digitally transform into as many different versions, because he's a sort of sea nymph, he's a tree, he's a kind of puff of smoke, he's all sorts of different things, and for him to actually finally be able to be them, but be able to sort of appear and behave in a sort of dimensional and magical way. And at the time, this was 2016, we kind of weren't quite there with media servers being able to kind of host the game engine and process the motion capture data and satisfactorily texture it, etc., etc., etc. So it was a bit of a little bit of a cheat, but not a massive cheat. But working in collaboration with Imaginarium,
I think we're definitely still cheating. So
yeah. Well, this was all Unreal Engine, so it was all done in Unreal by Imaginarium Studios, who you probably know better for like Gollum and Andy Serkis and such people. And they were kind of amazing in kind of bringing their technology and their know-how of motion capture into a theatrical space, which is really not used to any of that kind of stuff. And we were very lucky that the Accent suits went wireless around about the same time, so we had this very nice active tracking that was very, very fun and very easy to use versus the more passive kind of IR systems, which is where we sort of started, but they were much more problematic and required just so many more levels, more computers, because computers to process the tracking, computers to render, whereas all of this could actually be handled within one Unreal Engine. So we could actually have, not at terribly high resolution, just at 1080p, but he could sort of behave in a really lovely way. And he was also controlled by ArtNet as well, interestingly. That was from a Grand MA fixture with about 300 parameters that the programmer kind of wrote and pumped into the Unreal thing to control his appearance. Because you could choose different characters, different layers, different opacities. He could sort of behave in different ways. And
it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I just want to iterate. 4 years ago.
4 years ago. We did face tracking as well for one scene because he had to have a big face rig on to do that. But then all that, like the kind of almost embarrassing thing now is it was then just pumped into Disguise via an SDI output from the computer holding Unreal. So that was that. And we then
Isabel was sorry, Finn. Isabel was asking if you remember which motion capture system.
That's a very good question. It was an Accent suit, I know that much. And there was, I think it was a Vicon system that was maybe handling part of it, but I'm afraid I can't remember the exact system now, unfortunately, because I have to say I did get terribly involved in actually the nitty gritty of how it worked. I was more like, pictures need to be everywhere. Let's make that happen. So I'm afraid I can't remember. I know what the suit was, and its data was fed into Unreal, but quite what the intermediary was, I'm not quite sure.
Fair enough.
Yes, sorry.
No, that's okay.
But I can find out if you'd like to know and let you know via Jeffrey.
Or we can post in the comments as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Finn, I wanted to thank you so much once again for coming on the show. I think we've kind of hit the tail end of our hour. And I also wanted to thank everybody again for your support, for tuning in week after week. This has been an incredible experience, and we hope to bring more interesting conversation to you and content to you. And we look very, very forward to seeing you again next week. So thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for coming on board. And Finn, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone. And I'll see you next week.